Yeah, we are back on the air. Hello, Sophie.
Hello, nice to meet
you. So welcome everybody to this week's Event Insights. As you can see here, we have joining us Sophie Philip. So welcome, Sophie.
Thank you very much. Lovely to be here.
So Sophie is a freelance event manager. She has worked all over. We were just chatting about it earlier today. She's currently based near the Alps. And she does a lot of work in the UK. She also has done a lot of work in the Middle East and basically all over the world. So she's certainly the person to talk to today. And Sophie's going to actually be leading her session today on what it's like working in the Middle East as a woman. So obviously there's different codes of conduct, different ways to dress, different things like that. So Sophie's going to take us through a bit of that. And then she's left quite a bit of time at the end that we can go through plenty of Q&A time. So if anyone has any questions, as usual, just pop them in the chat box on the right, and we'll get to them at the end. To remind everyone as well, this session is recorded, and we'll be putting up a link to our YouTube page on Friday. So Sophie, I will hand it over to you.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, Chrissy. Yes, I kind of wanted to say that I kind of picked this topic just because there were so many people asking me so many questions. So I will just share my screen. Chrissy, can you see that? There we go. Yes, so operating in the Middle East as a woman. So yeah, picture of me and many of the women that I worked together with the first time I was there. So I consistently get asked about what it's like to be working in the Middle East, particularly as a woman. And I'm not about gatekeeping information. And yeah, just the shitting on people on LinkedIn or in person or even on Instagram, that people are like, hey, what's it like there? And it is always questions about operating there as a woman, as a female. So a little bit about my background. As Chrissy said, I work all over the world and I do quite a lot of different roles, but I have worked a lot in the Middle East. These are the primary locations that I have worked. I'm aware that the Middle East is many, many countries, and each one of them has their own culture and therefore their own kind of ways in which people are treated. So I will primarily be focusing on Saudi Arabia. It's kind of kicked off in the last few years and it's where a lot of work is available as well. I've worked for a real range of different companies out there and different kinds of sites. So sites that are very international, where most of the people that I'm working with are Westerners, Americans, South African, or Aussies and Kiwis. And then I've also worked on sites where there's very few Westerners there and it's more governmental led. And I'm working with lots of different locals, and they're really different in the way they operate, which I always find super interesting. But yeah, and also I think it's just worth saying that my experience is that of a white, hetero, able-bodied woman. A lot of this is about being a woman, but I'm also aware that I have privilege as a white person and as an able-bodied straight person as well. So working in the Middle East can be a difficult topic to tackle. There's not that many people talking about it and there's not that much information out there. I know when I first started working out there that I kind of looked at blogs and kind of got a couple of documents given to me before getting out there, and so many of them are really inaccurate. So everybody is very much entitled to their own opinion, but the reason I'm doing this is because of the change that's happening out there. It's massive, and I think it's better to get behind the change and support it rather than go against it and become a part of it. So I kind of have two really big passions in events. One is sustainability and the other one is feminism. And I always use sustainability to explain the feminism one. So you can work for, and I do work for, companies like Glastonbury, Boardmasters or Blue Dot, festivals that have big budgets and policies towards sustainability, and I can work with them. They align with my values, and it's really easy when I get on site, and it's brilliant to work with those guys. But where I can make a bigger change is where people don't have these budget lines, and I think sustainability is a much more tangible version of the way that you can explain that. But as a woman working out there, that's how you can make a really big change, and that is just by existing in space and just being really good at your job and delivering. That's how you can support that change. So I've been working out there for 5 years now, and it's definitely changed a lot over that period. A large part of that is to do with the 2030 vision. You can kind of look that up and find out a lot more about that online. It's huge. It was announced in 2016, and it's basically the way that Saudi Arabia has opened up to the world. They're moving away from the economy of oil and towards other sectors like international trade, tourism, and therefore massive entertainment. Part of that diversification is changing its laws and massive change in the culture. It's something that people are really behind. It's really interesting to look at. They're not the only people that are doing it either. Kuwait have got a 2035 vision. Other people have had 2021 visions. It's something that the whole of the Middle East is moving towards, modernizing, becoming kind of more westernized, opening up, and just have this massive amount of money being poured into tourism and entertainment, which has resulted in jobs for hundreds of thousands of people who are there and lots of people who are coming over like me. From my very first job until now, there's been such a big change. It's been such a short period of time, realistically. And yeah, things massively changed. I was talking to a friend about it the other day. Not only is the way that it's portrayed in the media not accurate, but from when we first started working out there to now, it's wildly different. As a white young woman walking around, I used to get stared at quite a lot. Part because I was walking. I used to walk everywhere, a huge amount, and it's just not something that is often done out there. Or it's more so these days, but certainly not back in the day. Stuff like when you were walking around, people would just shout, "Welcome to Saudi" out of the window at you in a very friendly way, but they were just so excited to see tourists coming to their country for the first time, and they're so keen for it. It was great. Stuff like Uber drivers. When I used to take the same route to work, my first job, I was there for just short of 3 months, and Uber drivers I'd get in the car and they'd be like, "Oh my God," they'd be so excited that you're there and give you like a tour of the city. This is this building, and this is this building, and this was built by whoever. And yeah, that was the daily route for me every day, and I'd kind of just sit there and let them explain it, because they were just so excited to have a Western person in their car, because it was proof that things were really changing. It doesn't happen so much now, but yeah, it's still cool, and you have a lot of really interesting conversations, particularly with Uber drivers, I always find. One of the other big changes is that the events calendar out there now is super full. So they have what they call the seasons. There's Jeddah, Riyadh, and now Alula season. They are ways in which the city, that's a specific city, is activated. It's usually for about a month and a half, and they happen at different times of the year. So the calendar across the entire country of Saudi Arabia specifically is really full. And then alongside that, they've got massive sporting events happening now as well. Obviously, we've just had the World Cup in Qatar. Formula E is there, Formula One is there, huge boxing matches, horse racing. It's massive, and it's just expanding as well and getting bigger and bigger, and there's just so much opportunity out there. But yeah, unfortunately, the Uber driver routes and tour guides are pretty rare now, sadly. So a classic work day is something I quite often get asked questions about. One of my favourite things, or more important things I've learned, is site walks. They just don't happen in the middle of the day. Best time to do it is sunsets, and you can see they have some pretty mega sunsets out there. But yeah, I've operated out there from August all the way through to February, like kind of my experience. So I haven't been there in the real high summer. Yeah, August site walks in the middle of the day are just not a thing. So yeah, we get to spend a lot of time kicking around at sunset, taking pictures of snags and things to fix, but also some beautiful views. Meetings is, I think, the place in which sexism can rear its ugly head, and it certainly has for me throughout my career. It's the most black and white place in which you can see it. I've experienced sexism throughout the world, and including in the Middle East, including in Europe, and there's no more sexism there than there is in Europe. There's also equal amounts of allies out there. It's incredible and surprising the people that you meet that are super, super passionate about putting women in powerful positions or learning from women. There's definitely a really young community of men, definitely women as well, but particularly of men out there who are more than happy for you to teach them. And they really take that on board, and they really respect you, and they will defend you. And yeah, it's really beautiful to see. And as a young woman who often ends up in a position where I'm teaching older men anywhere in the world, is something I consistently struggle with, where my juniors are men who are older than me, is something that I've always found difficult. But never in the Middle East, it's really beautiful. One of my favorite examples is a meeting I was in. I was the only woman in there and the only white person in there. It was lots of military, lots of National Guard, Royal Guard, police, huge meeting. And I was talking, and there was someone at the back. There was someone who interrupted me, and someone at the back who was very clearly quite senior. There was a lot of stripes on his lapel, and he just said, "She hasn't finished speaking," which for a woman, any woman who's ever been in any meeting, will know is such a big deal. And I really appreciated it, and I still think about it to this day, and step up for myself occasionally because of that. But also just the conversation I had with him afterwards, and said, "Oh, thank you, I really appreciate that. I didn't know the guy afterwards," and was just like, "Oh," and he was just like, "Oh, it doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman. It's just rude." So yeah, that's kind of one of my favorite takeaways, and something I use as an anecdote when I'm trying to explain to people out there, explain to people who are thinking about working over there, the kind of thing that you can expect out there, because they understand that change is happening within the country, and they want to be one of the change makers, which is great. Somewhere that I have had surprises or differences between working in Europe and the Middle East is initial introductions, and that is usually just surprise. So my last name is Philip, so it's a man's name, and quite often I'll have conversations over a long period of time on email with someone, and then they'll come in to meet me. And because of my man's name being a last name, and they think it's the other way around, they think I'm Mr. Philip Sophie. So yes, and then they meet me and they're like, "You are a woman," and I'm like, "Yes, I am." And you kind of see them being like, "Okay, different, wasn't expecting this." And they're like, "And you're the boss?" I'm like, yes, I am. Like, it's always when you're in a senior position, and it's always surprise. It's never made my life harder, but it's always just a surprise for them to start off with, and they go, "Okay, cool," and we carry on, and we move forward. It's no different to the experiences I've had in the UK, particularly, where I've got junior staff that are men, and kind of you go to a meeting and people would immediately direct all of the questions or the information at my junior, who's there bringing coffee and taking minutes. And I'm like, actually, it's her who's in charge, not me. I don't know what you're talking about. So yeah, again, just massive similarities between what you get out there. And I think with surprising those people and being good at your job and really performing, like I say, you get to be part of the change, which is great. It feels brilliant. The other thing is weekends. That's quite a big difference. So the weekend out in Saudi, I think Dubai has just taken up the kind of the Western weekend. But out in Saudi, it's Fridays and Saturdays they have off versus Saturdays and Sundays. It's always good to be careful that you don't end up with just a one-day weekend. I know that when you work out there for a British company, for example, that is based in the UK, you kind of end up working a Friday and then you end up also working a Sunday. But it can go the other way, and you end up having a Friday, Saturday, Sunday off. So yeah, good one to watch out for. And then my other two kind of top tips and differences out there are two words. One is halas, and the other one is inshallah. So halas means like it's done. It can mean like I am done with it, we're not having any more conversation, and be like, finish, stop talking. Or it can be like quite a joyous, halas, it's finished, okay, we've made a decision. It's a good one to use. It's nice, I always think, to use local language, no matter where you are, just to have a couple of, yes, no, thank you, please. Doesn't matter which country you're in, I think you should always know the basics. And inshallah is literally means if God wills it to happen. So it's kind of like I hope so. So when you're like, oh, this place has to be secured at 2 o'clock, otherwise we can't pour the concrete and the concrete won't set. And they're like, yeah, inshallah. But yeah, it can be quite a fun, nice thing to work around, and it's nice to be aware of it and its exact meaning as well, so that you can be culturally sensitive towards it, because it's obviously part of the faith as well as part of the language. What to wear, it's something that I get asked about all the time, and you can end up spending a huge amount of money on clothes that you don't need, or you can end up getting there and realizing that you don't need to be as covered up as you've read in a blog from 2012. So just a couple of examples of me and my lovely friends in various outfits that we've worn to work. So myself in the blue shirt at the top there, I'm wearing an abaya. So that's a black cloak. They can be closed completely or open at the front. My first job out there, I wore my abaya maybe the first half of the gig, and would wear it to any really senior meetings as well, just as kind of a mark of respect. But as things have changed, I now just wear t-shirts at work. It's a real change that you can physically see that's happened over the course of the gig. And it's worth saying as well, like if you're working in Qatar or Dubai, those rules are different again. And it also really depends on where you are. Like if you're in a really family orientated place like the mall, versus if you're in an office which is very westernized, you're going to be wearing different stuff. So best thing to do if you're going out there is have a chat with a woman who's already on site or has been on that specific site before. It's totally normal to ask that, you know, if there's a man that's employing you that you've interviewed with, it's totally normal and acceptable to say, can I have a chat with a woman before I get there who's worked on your site? Because it might be acceptable to wear vests and leggings on that site, or it might be that they would really rather that you wore, you know, down to the ankle and onto the wrist. But yeah, it's really a lot more relaxed now. The middle picture there with my friend in the black and white dress, that's in Qatar. So totally normal to wear that out there. That was during the World Cup, when kind of clothing expectations were also relaxed as well. And there's a picture of myself and my friend Lou there out in the desert. When you're out in the desert, it's always good to check with your guide as well, but you can very much relax and wear what you want. But yeah, something I always get asked is exactly what you're wearing, because everywhere you go, you get different information and it's a nightmare. Long stints in the Middle East. A lot of the gigs out there are really long stints. Like I said, the season will last. Sometimes an area will be open for 2 weeks, sometimes it'll be a month and a half, and then you'd have at least a month and a half of build on top of that. So you can have some really, really long periods of time out there. These days, there's a lot of direct flights out there. It's super easy. I can go directly from Geneva to Riyadh, I think 2 or 3 times a week, and it's the same with London. It used to be a nightmare getting there. The airport and the passport control is different every time you go. They are definitely figuring it out. It's so much more efficient than it used to be, but with your visas and the different kinds of visas you can get and the different lines that you go into, it's always slightly different. And if you are not used to traveling outside of Europe, that can be quite heavy when you get there. And yeah, it's a word of warning for anyone who doesn't get there. It's fine. It just takes time. It's not always clear which line you're supposed to go into. Have a chat with someone who's just come in through the airport and find out if anything's changed. But ultimately, you will get through, and it really depends on which airport you're going into and how busy it is at that time. Try and find out when it's not going to be busy. But yeah, sometimes it can be 3 minutes, sometimes it can be 3 hours getting through there. In terms of accommodation, there's lots of different options. I have stayed in apartments there, in hotels for months and months, or in compounds. Compounds are really relaxed with fully kind of Western ideals and values in terms of particularly what you are wearing. Apartments can be really nice for if you're doing long term. I know having a washing machine and a kitchen is an absolute game changer for me. And obviously hotels. It's worth always looking into gyms when you are looking to these spaces. So your gyms will generally be separate for women and men, and the same for pools. Not so much in compounds, but with hotels and apartments. I have stayed in the same hotel so many times. They know my name every time I go. They're just like, "Hello, Miss Sophie, welcome." They say, "Welcome home," which is lovely, because it was one of the few places with a women's gym and a women's pool. So I always kind of got asked if I could go there. And the last one is sanitary products. It's not super easy to get hold of specific sanitary products while you're out there. So if you're going for a couple of months, bring them with you. Or again, like I say, consistently things are changing out there. So give your mate a ring that's already out there, or speak to someone else that is employed by the company as well. A lot of people ask about what makes me comfortable and which jobs I pick out there. I am in a very privileged position now where I've worked hard out there and I've worked for a long time, so I can pick and choose between jobs. And the first question I ask, and it's the first question I ask regardless of whether I'm in the Middle East or I'm in Albania, Senegal, Bristol, doesn't matter, is how many other women are there in senior positions? And that's specifically senior positions, because the 50-50 split is really common now, which is brilliant, but more often than not, those women are in junior positions. So seeing a female director, event manager, head of events, head of ops, alongside the senior position that I'm taking makes a massive difference for me. And it already sets the tone for the kind of show that you're going to have and how much of a change you're going to make by being there. But yeah, it's one of my favorite things is being able to work with a lot of other women. Cool. I said I'd leave a lot of time for questions, and I have. Great. I will stop sharing.
Thank you, Sophie. Well, that was very interesting.
Good. I'm glad. Yeah, I just had a look at all the questions that I consistently get messaged on LinkedIn and compiled them.
Yeah, I'd say you get a good few all the time, especially being over and back quite a bit.
Yes, yeah, and yeah, you get a bit of a reputation as that woman that flies around the world, and they're like, "You're a good person to ask this question. You're very outspoken."
So if anyone joining us here today has any questions that they'd like to ask Sophie, if we pop over to the Q&A only section here on the chat box, you can fire them in there. Oh, we have one here on the left as well. Also, yeah, even as you were saying there about when you were over and people are so welcoming and so happy to see you, it reminded me of parts of India where I traveled. I haven't actually been to Saudi quite yet myself, but I was traveling India for a couple of months a few years ago. And similar, like it was off-peak season, so there were no other white people around. There was very few women walking around. And you really notice that, like, if I'm walking down a street, people would literally be stopping and staring, and not in a rude way or in a weird way. They were just like, "Hi, welcome," and it's just
yeah, super inquisitive. Really want to know what you're doing there, why you're there, but like, yeah, really excited about the fact that you are there, which happens slightly less now, which I'm occasionally a little bit sad about, because I'm not a rarity. I'm not quite as interesting as I was once previously, but I think it makes a lot of people feel very comfortable when you see other people like you around. Yeah. I definitely found that in Qatar. It was I've certainly never done anything like a World Cup before, and yeah, it was really interesting just to like, oh, there's everyone, there's white people everywhere actually.
That was different, all right.
Yeah, definitely.
We've got a few questions coming in here. We've got one from Paul, Kelly, Ala, and Joan. Can you see those coming in, Sophie?
I can, yes. Cool. Paul, is there anywhere that I wouldn't work? I don't think so. I think I'm up for anything as long as it's safe. Like I said, I think one of the more dangerous places I've worked is Senegal. I was the security company that was out there, I know personally, and so I was really confident in my safety there. But certainly in the Middle East, no. I think it's a really safe place as well. I know that Qatar particularly, they've been kind of promoting their safety, and they did something the other day when they left out a load of cash and a MacBook and some phones and stuff, in a public space. I think it was in like a cafe, and then walked away for like an hour and a half, and it was still there. So yeah, I think particularly in the Middle East, I do feel super safe. But saying that, I've only operated in major cities pretty much, or just outside, like in the desert outside major cities. But yeah, I'm pretty much up for anything, and I think a lot of my employers know that and send me to far-flung places. Kelly, okay, most event experience require proven experience. What's the best way to achieve moving from corporate to event? Just get stuck in. It's difficult, I think, particularly with corporate to event, to stay at the same level, and it's the same moving event to corporate, is to potentially take a job, like a step down. So, you know, if you're quite senior in corporate, if you're an event manager, take a job as a site office manager. The rates in the Middle East are very good, and you work out there for long stints of time. So if you're freelance, it's a really nice way to make some money, and you can probably take a step down and still get paid quite good rates. And then as soon as kind of someone recognizes you in the more in the less kind of corporate industry, then you'll fly. If you're good enough, you'll keep going. Alla, how do you find these gigs? Where would you recommend starting? Like I said, I've been working out there for a long time now, and there aren't that many young women working there, and I've been working there for a long period. So I am now in a very comfortable position where people approach me. LinkedIn is also incredibly useful. I described it to someone as a necessary evil, talking about yourself. Sometimes on LinkedIn, it's what you have to do, and you don't always have to talk about yourself. You can talk about other things or interesting things. But yeah, it's a really brilliant way to get yourself out there. In terms of where to start, I'd tend to go to a recruitment agency if you really don't have any kind of connections with people already out in the Middle East. A lot of gigs use massive recruitment agencies to recruit hundreds and hundreds of people, often locals, but also if you've got experience in events and you're keen to work out there, like I say, do one starting job. It's the same when you volunteer in the UK at a music festival. One starting job, show off, show how good you are, and you'll absolutely fly.
I've also just, Alla, sorry to interrupt you, Sophie. I've also just popped a link into the other chat box there with a link to the Safe Events Live Force site. So we have quite a bit of freelance gigs coming up there. If you want to sign up for that, you might be able to see something you like.
Yeah, Safe Events are lovely. I've never worked for them, but I've worked alongside them at multiple gigs, and I'd highly recommend them. They're great. Are there Black women working in the field in the Middle East? Yes, they are few and far between. I actually had a conversation with a person of colour that was working with me the other day about discrimination and that kind of thing out there. There are a lot of companies working out there who are very specifically making sure they've got diversity, which is brilliant. I can't say that you will definitely not experience any kind of racism out there. I think it's very similar to sexism, that I've experienced it throughout the world, and unfortunately I think racism is just as prevalent in any country as it is in Saudi Arabia. However, there are also massive allies out there and people who are desperate to make sure that their teams are really diverse, and that is people of colour, Saudi nationals, white people, every kind of person, which is really lovely. But yes, they are out there. There's not enough of them. I'd love to see more people of colour working out there. But yeah, I'd go for it for sure. I'm curious if there's a difference for men and women when they hear Inshallah. After 18 months here, I generally find Inshallah to be a kiss of death, needing to get something done, as if the goes Inshallah means saying la, which is no. Great question, Shane. That's kind of why I want everyone to know what Inshallah means. When people are like, oh yeah, Inshallah, and you can kind of very gently say, no, not Inshallah, and you can kind of explain to them why it's really important that it gets done. And I quite often say, is it Inshallah or is it no? And kind of just go down a hard line with it and be like, no, I understand, like, you hope. And I've had people explain to me back exactly what it is that they mean. And you have to be really delicate with it because it is part of their culture and part of it's, attached to their religion. And yeah, sometimes you do get sick of hearing inshallah rather than yes, that will get done, which is something we're very used to. So someone goes, yeah, sure, 2 o'clock, that'll get done. But yeah, I know what you mean about it can be a bit of a kiss of death sometimes. But I think you just kind of have to go, is it inshallah? Are you saying no? Because if it's no, then I can work around it, and we need to work around it. But yeah, it's something that I now also use in day-to-day, which other people find slightly bizarre when I'm in Yorkshire saying, yeah, inshallah, and people are like, what? And the same with halas as well. I think halas is probably my favorite one. And I think the people that you're with appreciate you using a couple of their words too. Is there any age limits from Joan? Absolutely not. No. And the upper end? Yes. On the lower end, 18. I assume that you're asking about the upper end. No. There are people of all ages working out there. The only thing that I would say is make sure that you are fit and healthy enough to work in the heat. Depending on the role, you do pass from one air-conned area to another air-conned area a lot. But if you were to take a role, for example, with safe events, where you are on the ground rather than in a control room or in an office, then you would have to make sure that you are fit and healthy enough to operate on the ground during those really, really high temperatures sometimes, or have a conversation with your employer to see if I can work at night or that kind of thing, and what the physical requirements are for the job. You mentioned asking if there's any senior women in the site before accepting the role. Is it a deal breaker for you? Have you ever been the first hired woman on a particular event? It's definitely very important to me. And I think when people are putting a team together and, it's June now and they're putting a team together for December, they might say, do you know what, we actually haven't got any other women on yet, but there's 18 roles we're hiring for, and we've only hired, you're the second one to be hired. And I think the way in which someone responds when you ask that question is indicative of their intentions and indicative of their values on the site. And yeah, that's true everywhere. I'm fine being the most senior woman, but I'm not fine being the only senior woman and everyone else being PAs. It's not how I roll, and given the hiring market right now, it's a lot easier for employees rather than employers. We're in high demand, and you can pick and choose. And I think by picking and choosing and by asking those questions, you are demanding that people hire more women and that they hire women into senior positions. Hopefully that answers that question. Karen, is there anything from working there that you bring to the UK? Just the calmness. Like, it can be fast and loose out there. So in the UK, when something's on fire, you're like, okay, something's on fire. But out there, not so much now, but certainly my first few years out there, because we don't know how the crowds move. There's lots of different things, elements that we don't understand, like the popularity of certain acts at music venues. They're just not used to parking in the way that we're going to expect them to park. It's a real unknown. And so there'll be like 4 or 5 major incidents happening at the same time. And it's like, okay, that's just another Tuesday. So I think I've definitely brought a sense of like, it's fine, it's okay, back to the UK. In terms of, I think halas is my favourite thing to bring back to the UK events. It's done. Stop having the conversation. I've definitely sat in many a meeting room where we're just going round and round and decisions aren't being made or decisions have been made and we just keep talking about the same thing. And yeah, so I think, alas, it's over, it's done, the decision's been made is my favourite thing to bring between the two.
You might have to make up a word in English to cover that to use in Irish and UK meeting.
It might be, it'll be really, stop talking. It might be the Yorkshire term. But yeah, there's lots of people in the chat as well.
Okay, so any other questions then before we let Sophie leave us? I think that's been really interesting so far. And as we've seen here, there are a couple of questions coming in that I think you've answered very well. What can tend to happen as well, maybe even if people think of something afterwards, feel free to either like jot it on our LinkedIn page or even connect with Sophie. You can ask something through me and I'll get it in touch with Sophie as well. Whatever works for everyone.
Yeah, I was saying to Chrissy, there were lots of people, there weren't many comments on the kind of initial post that we put out, and I was like, oh, are people going to be interested in this or not? And there are very few comments, but loads of direct messages on LinkedIn, tons of them. So I think sometimes people don't feel super confident to ask questions in more public setting. So feel free to drop me a message on LinkedIn and I will get back to you at some point. I'm about to delve into the kind of 6 weeks of pretty intense UK festival season, but I promise I will get back to anyone's questions eventually. I'm just wanting to anyone who has any queries about working out there. It's a really great way to open up to different cultures, different people, and not just people from the Middle East, people from all over the world. I've met the coolest people out there and have made friends for life. And it's an area of the world that is diversifying and changing at such a rapid rate. I think that everyone should feel comfortable to work in that space. So hopefully I've given people a little bit of information so they can do so if they want to.
Yeah. And as we were saying, even this morning when we were chatting, Sophie, the events industry and people who work in the events industry are just really great people to work with as well. Like if people are interested in finding out more about working out in the Middle East or in different places like that, you've even seen Paul Astley. He was kind enough to say, go ahead and connect with him on LinkedIn and he can guide you in wherever needs to be guided. Also, we've got our Live Force link with Safe Events as well. It is a very inclusive and very kind of open community where people are happy to chat and help one another out, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember before I first worked out there was a wonderful woman called Hannah who I messaged, and she got on the phone with me about an hour. And it's something I've done repeatedly over and over again for people who are often booked already to come out and they're like, I have a million questions. And I'm like, okay, cool, call me. And like you say, super inclusive, super supportive community. You were saying loads of people were sharing this, kind of the link to this. And I think that just represents how supportive the community is. I know that I had a lot of help as I was progressing from a junior through, which I was explaining to someone the other day. They're like, oh, like you have help. I'm like, yeah, no one just jumps into a senior management role. Like, no, you have like good 4 or 5 people that give you leg ups and give you references, and you give them a ring and ask the questions and that kind of thing. So yeah, I'm all about that and all about mentoring schemes, and it's a great community.
Because I think no matter where you're going, there's always going to be differences in culture and differences in how you work around people. So it is important to kind of speak to someone on the ground and figure out the best way to go about that ahead of time.
Yeah, definitely. And because it's changing so rapidly, if you can speak to someone who's out on the ground and in that city, in that country, on that site, can be wildly different to 6 months ago on that site, or 6 months ago in Qatar versus Dubai versus and then even like in Jeddah versus Riyadh is different again. And the rate at which the change is happening, it's really great to speak to someone who's literally just come home or has gone out a week before you, and they're like, t-shirts are cool, don't bother with the oversized shirts. That's something that we always used to wear, was kind of transitioned from the abaya to just a large oversized shirt, and it was like an intermediary kind of culturally sensitive way of not having to wear these longer black clothes, sometimes pretty clumsy when you'd scramble around underneath telehandlers already. And I've got a friend who was always cycling. She was health and safety, she's fantastic. I think she's done some work for Safe Events actually. And yeah, she was always cycling with her abaya flapping behind her, and she was like, yep, they haven't seen that before. First trip out there, she was brilliant. She says that she looked like a witch because she had black hair as well, and she had this abaya,
this big black cloak going behind her.
brilliant. And yeah, there's a lot of firsts that trip, I think, for a lot of people, but it was really cool.
Nice. Okay, well, I think that seems to be all the questions that have come in. Thank you again,
Brilliant.
Sophie. That was absolutely fantastic. And everyone, thank you for joining us. As I said, this has been recorded and we will get the YouTube link up on Friday, and I'll send an email around to everyone with the link to that as well. So thank you very much. I hope everyone has a great day.
Thanks. Cheers, Chrissy. Bye.
Bye.